Hi, and welcome to episode 10 of Differential Diagnosis, where we'll be differentially diagnosing the mid-season episode of season 1 called Detox. My name is Harvey, I'll be a co-host, and your other co-host is Gaz.
Pleasure to be here, Harvey, to dissect this, one of your favourite episodes. You said to me earlier that this was the episode you would show someone to introduce them to House.
Yeah, I love this episode. This episode doesn't turn up. I mean, out of curiosity, I did look through a couple of the all top 10 House episodes, like things that people post or talk about, and Detox doesn't really turn up. Like 3 Stories does, DNR does, the Socratic Method turns up a lot, but yeah, like Detox doesn't really turn up as far as I can tell, which is strange. Like, what are your thoughts on the episode? Like, just casually, just before we start, because obviously we're going to spend the next 40 minutes or so talking about the episode, so don't blurt all that out now.
I think it's a really good episode. You know what my feelings are about the previous episode that we looked at, which I felt was a bit of a, as they say, Debbie Downer in comparison to DNR.
Yeah.
And so I think this is a really good, it's a better improvement. We're also outside of the Foreman trilogy. We're in this kind of weird...
Thank God. Nothing against Foreman, but there was a lot of Foreman just there.
Yeah. Although it means that you have a sense of Foreman's personality, and he does intervene in this episode at a crucial point. So you kind of say, yeah, that makes sense. It's not like he just randomly comes out and just does the thing that he's going to do. There's some context to that we saw in the previous 3 episodes.
Yeah, completely. Well, it's a strange thing now because, you know, the 2 characters that we understand the most are House and Foreman, which is very important because, as we've discussed, like Foreman is kind of the foil to House, and they, you know, sort of Foreman is in conflict that he doesn't want to be like House, but at the same time, Foreman is also very much like House. So it's good that we know a lot about Foreman, but the fact that we just know so much about one of the 3 fellow doctors, and then we barely know much about Wilson at all or Cuddy. It's as you say, it gives a lot of context, but it's also extremely strange.
Yeah.
It's he's just had so much of the limelight. So it's good that we're moving away from him, but at the same time, this is a very House-focused episode because it looks into House's relationship with Vicodin, his pain-killing medicine. So it's great to have a House-focused episode because he is the main character, but it's also, I hope going forward there are more episodes exploring the other characters because we really haven't learned much about them.
Yeah, and I'm sure that's going to happen. It's kind of the focus on Foreman kind of does beg the question about, well, what about Chase and what about Cameron? What about we get hints of their characters and the conflicts they have within themselves, but we haven't gone into that sort of detail with them in comparison to Foreman. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, completely. I can't off the top of my head remember any specific episodes, but that's the excitement of watching the show chronologically.
Yeah.
We get to learn that as we go on, because I'd love to be one of those like encyclopedic knowledge of House M.D. people, but I don't have enough room in my brain to have all that information because I have other things going on in my life.
That, and we probably have deficient mental capacity, and between the 2 of us, we probably make a semi-decent TV critic at best.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, do you know what? I was being rude. I wish I actually did have that ability to remember that much information about House M.D. I'm actually just not good enough. So, well, this is Gaz. Well, why don't you give as always, we suggest you actually watch the episode because you know there's always a lot going on in a House M.D. episode, even though you might casually remember it from watching it a while ago. It's way easier to follow if you've watched it, and also gives you like more of a engagement in the discussion. So I'd suggest pause this and watch the episode if you haven't. But Gaz, until then, why don't you give us a synopsis of the episode?
Well, this synopsis is powered by house.fandom.com, as usual. Powered because they put the texts on the website and then we use it. That's what we mean by powered. So here's the synopsis. Detox is a first season episode of House, which first aired on February 15th, 2005. A teenage boy is admitted when he starts coughing up blood. He gets worse in the hospital, which seems to rule out an environmental cause. Or does it? Meanwhile, House tries to prove he isn't addicted to Vicodin by betting a week without Vicodin against a month without clinic duty. But when he suffers withdrawal symptoms, his team starts to lose confidence in his judgment. Wow.
It's intense. Well, yeah, it's a landmark episode because it's focusing on House's drug addiction, finally, something that's been alluded to. And on top of that, it's halfway through the series. We made it, Gaz.
Wow.
We didn't give up.
We didn't give up. We got halfway through one season of House.
Absolutely, with many more to go. So to celebrate that, let's take the next hour to differentially diagnose House M.D, episode 11, season 1, Detox.
Mamma mia, here we go again. It's Amanda Seyfried.
It is, and the "here we go again" refers to a bit more teenage sex, just to kick off the episode.
Or does it?
Fantastic. Well, this, in terms of it, the episode, this episode doesn't relate massively to Occam's Razor, which also had the similar setup with two teenagers having sex, and then there was kind of some the patient drama focused around the teenager being ill, and then the parents of the teenager and the girlfriend of the teenager kind of fighting for dominance over who cares for him more, who's like the primary carer. But I think this episode does it much better, and we'll go into it as we go. But a great starting point is that instead of just banging so hard that they rock the limestone building, it instead, turns into a joke that she says, "Are you ready to have some fun?" He's like, "Definitely." And then she says, let's go take a joyride of your father's car,
Yeah.
which then instigates the medical problem because the teenage boy patient then his nose starts bleeding and he starts almost passing out, and then they get into a car
coughs
accident.
a lot. He's just like, just kind of, and you think she's going to crash or something crazy is going to happen because it's subverted so many expectations already.
I do. So they almost have a crash, which subverts the expectation, and they do actually have a crash.
Have a crash.
So many expectations subverted in one go. I feel like I'm watching season 8 of Game of Thrones.
Oh wow, so that's an insult and a half.
I know it is. Oh yeah, this has really placed this episode in time as well. So anyway, a nice little opener. It's interesting. It subverts expectations, based on a previous intro. It's solid and it's good, and also it does set up the kind of mystery because obviously there is an initial problem in that the team are going to misdiagnose a lot of his complications based on the fact that he did get into a car accident. So it's a good setup in that it becomes a bit of a query of what did the car accident cause and what did the initial inciting incident of him coughing and having a nosebleed cause. So I'd say a very tight setup to start with.
And then we go straight onto the scene with House waiting for his Vicodin and kind of getting fobbed off by the pharmacist.
Yes, but waiting extremely impatiently, like a drug addict would.
That pharmacist gets a short shrift in season 1 because as we know in the earlier episode.
Yeah, Occam's razor again.
Yeah.
Very, very, like, there's a lot of things with this in connecting this to Occam's razor, specifically the return of the sort of put down on a pharmacist.
Putting down pharmacists. Pharmaphobia.
So yeah, we have this nice setup. So we've set up the patient immediately, and then the I guess House's detox is the B plot. But they're kind of as important of each other, so I don't know if I go as far to say that. But anyway, the secondary plot is then immediately set up with House is waiting incredibly impatiently for his Vicodin. Cuddy notices that, and then this second setup is started, where Cuddy says, "You can't give up drugs for a week, and you get a month off clinic duty."
Yeah, and that sets up quite nicely, but Cameron is kind of just throwing out symptoms at House, and House is coming back with counterexamples, and they're not fitting the diagnosis. So now they're trying to square hemolytic. What is it? Hemolytic.
Are you waiting for it to appear on the board?
Yes, I am. Yes, I am. I don't think I'm ever going to see it again. Hemolytic anemia and internal bleeding. They're trying to bridge those two symptoms together, but they can't figure out a way to do it. So they first go for the drugs avenue, as per.
Well, it starts off with a very traditional differential diagnosis in that way, like everyone's sort of, throwing stuff into the bucket. But then it ends really early, and you can see during it that House is sort of like resting his head in his hands because he's starting to detox already.
Yeah.
From the lack of medicine. So it's it kind of starts off very generically or very standardly with that differential diagnosis, but then it sort of ends weirdly quickly. And it's I think that's a nice way to set up that like something isn't right, that there's something unusual about this episode. In the sense that it kind of breaks the formula in order to show that House isn't functioning correctly in both terms of the show and the character.
Yeah, and you can see he gets increasingly impatient. He's telling people that his ability to be patient enough to deal with this differential diagnosis, that his leg will only last until 11:15. It's like his schedule is all revolving around the Vicodin and managing his pain.
Yeah, we also learned that so we learned a few like integral things about House from Cuddy. We learned that he's on 80 milligrams of Vicodin a day, which is a crazy amount based on my understanding of how strong Vicodin is. So that's like an extremely high amount.
And that he was initially on 40.
Yes.
And that he's upped his dose, which kind of.
But it's this kind of this kind of conversation has been hinted at a bit. DNR was a great example when Henry Giles, the patient, notices him taking the drugs. He's like, "How many of those do you do a day?" And he just responds that he's in pain. But actually, this is interesting because now we get not only a definitive number of how many drugs he's taking, we can tell that we also get information that the situation is decayed somewhat, and he's taking a lot more than he should be. And then we sort of get this nice interchange of rationalizations where House is, saying, "Oh, no, I just need the drugs to function." And Cuddy's saying, "I can prove to you that it's not just that way. I can prove to you that the drugs are running your life if you take this week off." And then the rest of the episode then, because then House is sort of fighting against this idea that he's addicted, that setup pretty much suggests that House immediately is in denial that he's addicted. And so the rest of the episode is then spent with House trying to rationalize that point that he's not addicted while clearly detoxing. And we learn something very interesting about House, which we haven't until now. And I think this episode really humanizes House in a really good way. Because before we've seen him be grouchy, we know that he's kind of a theatric guy. We know that he likes to take the piss out of people. But one thing that's always been pushed is the idea that House is like really forceful on like objective truth. He's obsessed with truth. And because it's already set up that House is already in denial about this idea that he's addicted to the drugs, we get a glimpse of House's pride. Like, we know that House is a very proud man and he thinks that what he does is important, but we kind of see a very like kind of pathetic like ego to House, which we haven't before, where he basically spends the entire episode rationalizing every single thing that he goes through, even though he's detoxing. Every time somebody points out like, oh, that is a symptom of detoxing, he goes, no, and then he gives like rattles off like 3 alternative reasons medically why he's not detoxing. And obviously he does eventually come to the conclusion that he is detoxing when he kind of, you know, has the when he's kind of pushed on it. But it's an interesting aspect to House that we haven't really seen, and it's nice to see it set up just so well here that House is actually in some ways quite a pathetic man, very ego driven.
Well, he's not really in denial. I wouldn't say he's in denial about himself detoxing from the drugs. He's more in denial about how that might affect his rationality. Right?
Do you think so? I feel like because I don't feel at any point during it he says, oh, I'm not detoxing. Or he doesn't go, I'm detoxing, yeah, but it's like, you know, it's not that bad. I think he fundamentally dismisses that he's detoxing at all.
He does break his hand.
Yeah, like, I mean, talk about that event, because that is, I mean, that is the actions of a very desperate person. And it,
well, he'd see it as rational, because what he's doing is he's gaming, he's basically tricking his brain into not focusing on the pain in his leg.
Yeah. But what Cuddy tells him before he even detoxes is that, you know, if you're not addicted to the painkillers, then yeah, you'll be in pain, but it won't be that bad. But she says if you're addicted, then it will be, you know, increased by 30 times or something. And he goes, you know, and that's kind of the setup to that. So I think as soon as we see House break his hand, he pretty much answers which side of the fence he's on. But he still denies it throughout. But no, I do agree with you that he, a lot of the patient drama is kind of used as as kind of a battleground for everyone to keep questioning House's like ability to conduct medicine while he's clearly detoxing, which he obviously disputes. He says he's completely competent, but I do think that he fundamentally is in denial a lot of the time that he is detoxing, which I think says a lot about him. But it's interesting that you didn't see it like that, and you give him more of the benefit of the doubt that he's kind of discovering what's happening.
Like you say, he's very, very proud. And so he doesn't want to admit to others that he's detoxing, but he knows he is. He's not ignorant of that. That's my interpretation of what's going on. He's just saying, look, I'm not, as far as you're concerned, you treat me as you usually do, you know, and trust my judgment and my opinion, because it's still valid. Even if I'm going through this kind of very, like, somatically traumatic event.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you might be right, but I just think it's less self-denial as just denial to everybody else. It's not stupid. But like you say, how do we judge that? That's the kind of crux of the episode, right?
Yeah, true. Like, you know, yeah. Because, as you say, like, House can convince everyone that he's not addicted as much as he wants, but it's only until he stops taking the pills that even he admits that he is addicted. But, we kind of... But, yeah, as you say, like, if he tells you that he's fine, how are we to know that he's not? It's definitely an interesting setup.
Yeah, because he says, you know, they list all the symptoms, and he says it's not applicable. But what does he mean by not applicable? Not applicable to what? Applicable to who? Him, or just his judgment? Like, is he saying he knows he's going to go through those symptoms, but he doesn't see them as applicable to how he is as a doctor, or is it as a person? Again, it's like, how do you make that judgment? Yeah,
true. And there is a running there seems to be a running thing throughout House, which we've discussed, but and this comes up a lot, but it's this idea of It's quite. It comes up in the end when House admits to Wilson that he has been detoxing, and then they discuss it, which is a great scene, and we'll talk about it a bit later, I imagine. But it's when he says that, you know, the pills help him function and they help him do his job. And as you say, it's like referring to that, you know, is it about House as a person or as a doctor? It's just this, you know, the pills just keep you going from day to day to help you do that obsessive thing you love, which was something that was really well established in DNR.
Yeah.
And it's kind of getting a nice callback here that it's kind of sad in a way that Henry Giles diagnoses House as an obsessive man who's nothing more than a doctor, and sort of highlights that the pills probably help him do that. And then we kind of learn that here objectively, like even House admits it out loud, that it's just, this is just what I am. This is what I have to do to achieve it. And it's just a very bleak like discovery of someone.
Yeah, that is very bleak. It's very bleak.
Yeah. And that conflict, I'd say that conflict really kicks off the whole series. I think this is what makes House special. And then this dealing with, like, you know, is House a person, or is he more than a doctor? Is he just like, is he valued on just his utility as a medical man?
Yeah.
That's a big running grappling thing, and it's kind of the crux of House's character development as a whole. So I think this is not only a really well done episode, but this is like a very important episode, and it's surprising that it doesn't come up more in people's, because that's why I really love this episode. This kind of episode just blows House out, because I don't think if you didn't have this episode and you just had House taking Vicodin and just being a kind of cranky doctor, I think you'd really be missing a huge part of why House as a character and as a show is interesting.
Yeah.
This is kind of definitely the gateway to the darker themes of House. Like, sure, we've had episodes where like a baby's died and, like, you know, there's been depressing things and it's explored homelessness. But yeah, like seeing that moment where he just accepts that he doesn't really have any value other than his job and the drugs help him do that is very bleak.
Yeah, I agree. And now you've said that, it kind of all makes sense. It's like it's probably the real opener of the entire TV show.
Yeah.
In a sense. We've had all this establishment. We've had hints about certain ways relationships function within his life. Mm-hmm. Like, you know, spending time alone at Christmas with Wilson.
Yeah, exactly. Like there's something very...
That was bleak. I mean...
It's very bleak and it's very human. But as you say, like, these are just insights into, like, that these characters are people and that they're interesting. They've got something going on. But this is the real... like, canon going off.
Yeah. Because it's, like you say, it's about who is House, in the sense is he just a doctor, or is he a kind of a person outside of his profession? He doesn't seem to think so. And then on top of that, you have this idea of, well, who is House to everybody else? Like, how do they value him? And some people value him as a teacher, some value him as a friend, but he doesn't necessarily see it that way all the time.
Yeah. It's also something quite like a nice little twist on the medical procedural as a whole, because in many medical procedurals and like pretty much any procedural that's about an occupation, the main characters kind of do a job, and it's you don't really learn a lot about them, like their private lives. You know, every episode is like, even CSI, because everyone works in the criminal like investigations unit. You don't see them just living their lives. You only see their lives when they're working in the CSI team.
Yeah.
Because that's the important thing. That's where those stories happen. Like, you know, their general day-to-day lives aren't particularly interesting. And House is like quite a funny twist on that, is that we only ever see House being a doctor because that's the format of the show and like where his real narrative is. but then we also, when House sort of admits, I'm also nothing but a doctor, it's like they kind of take that, the character of it, if you see what I mean, like we've only ever seen him as a doctor, and then he kind of actually says, I am literally nothing but a doctor. And there's something quite terrifying about that.
Yeah.
Like, you know, he's not he's not just a doctor character, but he goes home to something. He is literally a doctor character. Like when we watch the show House M.D, we're watching every aspect of House's life. That's all he is. Because when he's out of the hospital, not talking to anyone, he's not doing anything. He's just going home and drinking and watching the telly.
Yeah.
And then he comes back to work, and that's where the show and his real life start.
It's like he's been trapped. He's just been trapped in this kind of world, and he has no way of getting out of it.
Yeah, it's almost like someone just locked in a
floats in and out.
Where they are forced to live out this single character.
Yeah.
But
well, this is something that gets explored in future episodes and in future series, is what happens when you strip House away of everything that makes him meaningful. And so that will come up, but it's something to kind of reflect on.
Yeah, and that's when the drama's most interesting. And I'd say the problem with the show is there's only so many times you can do that, and I think the show definitely exhausts that. But the initial times when it does it are some of the best moments of House, and I think some of like the best moments of, like, you know, television writing. It's just really great. But this is that initial setup, kind of really gets to the core of House.
The other interesting thing is Foreman is challenging House again by saying he's going crazy, he's detoxing. And then House comes in and says, well, let's just get back to the job at hand.
House overhears him slagging him off, which is quite interesting, and doesn't really seem to react to it.
Yeah. Because he's just, again, he's still focusing on the role. Everyone else is focusing on him. And trying to see whether they're testing the hypothesis of whether he's rational or not.
But the other, I think Cameron and Chase are quite defensive of House, which is still back to that initial setup, which is Cameron and Cameron starts to turn more, but Chase is always on point that House is fine.
Yeah.
Which is, it's quite funny that Chase is so defensive of House. I mean, that's why I want to learn more about Chase as a character, because while, you know, even Cameron is swayed to the idea that maybe House is acting irrationally, like Chase is always on House's side.
Well, yeah, I mean, Chase's background might give more insight into why he has a little bit more leniency for House.
Yeah, exactly.
He has much more contact with the medical profession than both Cameron and Foreman, actually.
Yeah.
So he probably has a better idea of how loopy good doctors can be.
Yeah. And it's quite interesting as well with as you say, like Foreman really questions House. But there's a great moment when Foreman comes into his office and gives House the Vicodin and says, I think he says, you know, I came here to work with you, not babysit you.
Yeah.
And so Foreman is just like, Foreman is just trying to almost create that original version of House, even if it means like giving him highly addictive, like, you know, Vicodin, which he's clearly got a problem with. It's like Foreman doesn't really care, which says a lot about Foreman. It's like Foreman isn't really personally interested in House. Like, I think Cuddy and Wilson are concerned, and so is Cameron. But Foreman just seems to be more concerned about House just functioning as a doctor and just not really, you know, ruining it for the patient.
This is also one of my favourite scenes that produces one of my favourite stills, is when he goes and looks at breaking his hand with a mortar and pestle. Because he does that kind of sweaty, suffering face.
Hugh Laurie's performance in this is absolutely great.
Yeah, it is.
This really cements why he's so good.
Oh, Jesus Christ. He just broke his hand. And then does the smile, and it's just this kind of absolute relief.
Yeah, it's a stunning performance. It really
And
is.
and then you think, okay, how can he not be insane? He
Yeah.
just broke his finger.
Well, it's really comical with them because House progressively gets more sweaty, more red-eyed. He then, has a broken hand, and he keeps coming back to the patient to be
Mm,
involved in like the diagnostics. The team try and keep House away. It's very funny this because we haven't talked much about the patient story, and I'd say the patient story isn't really like thematically tied in any way, but the way that the patient story works is it's just a very complicated case,
mm,
and it's something that the team are struggling to solve by themselves, and it's really something that would require House to be on point for. And it's just they try and keep House away though, even though it's kind of to their detriment. But every time House turns up, he's just, rude. He gets sweatier. Like he even turns up at one point, and then his hand's broken, and
mm.
the patient's father just does not trust him at all because he looks insane, and it just creates like it's a really I think it's played for laughs intentionally.
Mm.
But the actual setup is just like it's absolutely absurd. That House is just like like during a really intense time when, the patient would be expecting like the best treatment. Just you have this doctor who's clearly going through detox with like cradling a broken hand, just like yelling at him.
Um,
Like he can barely function later in the episode. He's just leaning against a wall, just like whispering under his breath.
Also, this is a moment where so Wilson is attending to House's broken fingers or finger, and basically he tries to BS his way out of why he had broken his hand, and Wilson just sees straight through it. He knows why he did it.
Oh yeah, doesn't he say he trapped it in a car door by accident?
Yeah, it's like no, you haven't. I
But
know
that's where
exactly
that
why you
self
did it.
denial comes. It's not self denial, but it's just like House will just lie, even though everybody knows he's not. He'll just say, "Oh, I'll just lie and get through it because I can't be bothered to discuss it."
Yeah, that's one of he's. This is another thing about his character is he does avoid things. There's such a confrontational character when it comes to his personal life. He's always trying to find ways to avoid
Yeah, and he's
any
like,
sort of examination or prying into his underlying character or motivations.
yeah, and even though I think House often plays that off as kind of my life isn't interesting, I think it actually comes from a place of fear
Mm,
because when House does open up, he's clearly a very damaged man. I think House is like, yeah, he even does it when Henry Giles starts diagnosing him in DNR, and he just kind of comes off with these fobby things like, "Oh, I'm in pain" or something.
yeah,
And yeah, like I think House is more terrified actually that somebody would unveil him
yeah.
because House, as much as House tries to hide his private life, he definitely wears his problems on his sleeve. Like he's not very subtle, especially
Mm.
now in this episode.
The other thing about it is that he doesn't want other people's conception of his objectivity to be compromised, because he is objective in what he does. He's very good at what he does, but the moment people start prying into his life, they might start asking questions of him all the time, and sometimes he doesn't need that. He doesn't want that. He doesn't
Yeah.
want people thinking about him as a damaged man. They want to see him as a brilliant doctor.
Yeah. And that ties perfectly into the
Mm.
like, is it the battle of the man and the doctor? Yeah, so let's talk about the patient storyline because the patient storyline in this is really good. It is kind of outshone slightly by the detox angle, but because that's just such a like engrossing storyline. But in terms of the patient drama, I think it because it has such a correlation with Occam's razor, in which there was, a young couple, they were having sex. One of, the male teenager gets ill, and then the parents get involved, and then it's kind of this weird like drama between the patient's girlfriend and the patient's mother. And I think this kind of replicates that setup, but it does it more interestingly and better. So yeah, like, what are your thoughts, Gaz, on like the pacing drama in this and why it possibly compares favourably to Occam's razor.
Yeah, because there's a relationship between parent and patient and girlfriend, which is exactly the same kind of triangle that happened before. And
Yeah.
the tensions are completely different. Similar, but different in the sense that the father seems to be a little bit more rational, but he's also very fearful because his wife had died from cancer earlier. He's afraid that that's going to happen to his son. So he gets preoccupied by that rather than the tensions between girlfriend and him. I think the other thing that's interesting about the patient story is actually something that's maybe overlooked. It's a bit of a Cameron story.
Yeah.
It is a Cameron story in the sense that it's about her interaction with the father and trying to convince him of the best course of action, even when she isn't very much signed on to it. Like she thinks it's lupus, not cancer or HEPI. They're treating him for HEPI. They're going through this kind of very convoluted process to try and figure out a way to treat the patient. Things are getting worse. They're trying other treatments. Sometimes they get better, so he has a blood clot in his eye, that gets resolved. But then they put him on the Hep E treatments. His liver's shutting down. Looks like he's going to die. I would say the one thing that isn't as good as in Occam's razor is not as much tension. Yeah, we do see a guy bleed out from his behind, but it doesn't feel like there is as much at stake because it just, I don't know, there's just doesn't feel like there's as much tension in the storyline as before. I don't know why.
Is that because maybe like the team aren't, because House isn't really involved?
Yeah,
it doesn't seem like
so.
The team are as confused. They're kind of just like, it feels like at the very end it gets serious.
Yeah.
When he might be about to die, but it isn't. He's not like in the ICU. He's not on like death's door at any point. Maybe that's it. I don't know.
Well, he's at death's door. It just feels like there aren't as many radical procedures being used to try and solve this issue. It's just like, let's try this treatment, let's try that treatment. There's not much of the procedure involved. You don't see like too much surgery apart from the eye, removing the vitreous fluid from the eye to relieve pressure on the blood vessels to allow the clot to resolve itself.
Which is an interesting moment because that blood clot removal is a nice bit of a Chase moment.
Yeah, it is.
Because Chase comes up with that idea not to actually resolve the greater case, but just to save his eye, which hasn't really happened before. Sort of all the medicine they do has been focused on solving the fundamental problems. So kind of, I think it says a little bit about Chase that he actually goes ahead and he's a problem solver. I'm sure he like really solves it because he's addicted to problem solving, because he definitely emulates House in that way. But it's it's nice to see that like from Chase. It's a little bit extra that he actually kind of cares about the patient's general well-being.
Yeah. But I would say it's it's mainly Cameron centric because of the fact that it's all about her establishing trust with the father to try and push forward the treatment of this patient. And she also becomes very protective of the patient and the father because she then confronts House and tries to push House away from the case, especially when he's starting to figure out that the cat might be involved in this, because he didn't think they got an adequate patient history from him, from the son and the father, which leads to a bit of a good old detective work.
Yeah, I really like these like side glances where it's like Foreman and Chase like digging up a dead cat, because the doctor because the episode can, they're always looking for causes and solutions everywhere they can. It's part of the whole like, oh, the doctors break into houses, which is a funny idea, but like them having to dig up a dead cat is just another version of that. But it's very nice, and it's also nice that they're like so annoyed about it when they do it.
Yeah, and also it's another opportunity to see House dissecting something quite grotesquely. So last time it was a baby. This time it's a cat.
Absolutely. Which and we also see that obviously the shaking of the hand. House is very much going through detox at this point.
And then you see him trying to focus, and Cameron's in the background, and she's still incredulous about his method.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. It's interesting that you note that it's a very Cameron-focused episode, because Cameron does play a big part in this, especially with the bridging the gap between House and the patient, and she does become very protective and possibly. I mean, the way that everyone reacts to House's detoxing is obviously Foreman tries to get him back on drugs to get him back to normal. Chase sort of denies it, but Cameron builds trust with the patient and actively tries to push House away and kind of turn the patient against House's.
Well, not turn him away, just protect the patient from House's, what she might see as irrational interjections.
Yeah, fair enough.
That's how I see it. I don't know. Sorry, I didn't mean to correct that, but
no, I think that's you've put it better. No, I agree.
Right. And now we get to the part where so the solution they think is, because they think that the patient's got a form of hepatitis that stems from lupus. They're about to give him a new liver, and then this is quite a hilarious bit because he hates surgeons by the looks of it, or he always gives surgeons a rough time, like when he inflated the size of a tumor so they get removed.
Yeah, absolutely. But in this one, he just walks in and just starts sneezing and coughing everywhere, which it's just that level of bluntness.
Laden scissor caliper things on the operating table.
Yeah. Which but the problem is, like, House has been this theatric before.
Yeah.
But because now he's detoxing, it's funny that now nobody trusts him and thinks he's being insane, even though he's been like this before. It's just that in his current state, it's like, oh, is it the drugs or is it House being rational?
Yeah.
Which kind of is quite funny that it still keeps playing into that, is House in his right mind, which I guess the conclusion is that House is in his right mind. Kind of, because he is the one who actually resolves the case, even though he pisses off a lot of people during it and gets punched by the patient's father. But yeah, House does end up resolving it, and because they were, as Gaz said, they were going to replace his liver because they thought he had a version of Hepi, and then House notes that actually it's an environmental cause caused by termites in the kid's house that are releasing gases.
That then gets stored in his fat cells, and then as he's slowly starving because he's not eating properly, the fat cells are being released. And then there's a massive confrontation area moment where the father, goes at House and slaps him, doesn't even punch him, slaps him to the ground.
But does eventually relent, because House's point was, as Gad said, with the fat, with the kid's fat depleting, that he was always going to keep releasing this poison. So even if they, give away, put another liver in him, the poison, the underlying condition will just kill it. And there's a moment where the patient's father has to make a choice about whether or not to believe House. And that's, as you say, this is when the Cameron story plays in again. And then Cameron turns around and says, actually, you should listen to Dr. House. And it's this, it's not really the patient that trusts House. The patient trusts Cameron.
Again, the concept of trust is integral to this episode. It's trust in House. It's distrust in House. It's trust in the process. It's trust in Cameron.
Yeah. Because House is correct, but it takes Cameron to say the same thing for him to believe her, which is a kind of a very interesting thing, because it kind of demonstrates that people aren't just making decisions based on the evidence. They make it based on very human connections.
And it's also interesting as it's like a moment in Cameron's arc because she's starting to tell the truth. Whereas before she was, like in that episode before, she lied to try and save a patient or to administer a treatment. And before that, not being able to inform a patient in an earlier episode that they were going to die. She just couldn't do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So now she's telling the truth. She's engendering trust. And then has to have, I think, less trust but more faith in House to resolve the problem. So it's like there's trust and there's also, I guess, a kind of faith in House's ability, even if he is sick.
Like fundamentally assuming that he knows what he's doing.
And he's right.
Well, I think yes, he's always right. And unless he's not in the odd episodes where they want to mix it up.
Yeah.
It's in terms of about the patient and the father and the patient's girlfriend dynamic as well. So I related this back to Occam's razor before. But I think one of the components that makes the drama slightly better is that because in Occam's razor the mother was accusing the girlfriend of just giving him drugs.
Yeah.
Giving the patient drugs and just of lots of things which they just seemed to come out of nowhere. Like she didn't really know this person. She was making random accusations. Whereas I think this sets it up much better because the daughter, the girlfriend actually was in rehab for alcoholism at 13. Like we kind of learn that she's had a bit of a bad childhood. It starts with her stealing the father's car, which was an anniversary gift from his wife before she died of cancer. And it sets up that this girlfriend, like, you know, she's definitely got some personality issues which then actually inform him being critical of her and questioning her. I think that's set up a lot better because and then it does turn out that actually she was totally innocent, and even though she did still steal his car like she actually wasn't endangering him with drugs. But that actual that kind of infighting that's occurring in the patient story is actually set up and interesting here. It's not just an arbitrary, let's have a parent and a girlfriend argue because that's dramatic. The drama actually comes from something.
It's a fear of revisiting tragedy again for the father.
Yeah, exactly. And it's it's incredible the small tweaks that you can make to a setup which make it interesting. I think we've noted this with a few House episodes that House episodes will retread similar like themes or like concepts or like, you know, drama dynamics, but the twists they make on them are just, you know, it's what makes the difference. Like just giving that girlfriend that background makes that drama engaging because it doesn't feel like people are arguing over nothing. It then like brings some kind of mistrust to a character.
Yeah.
Which, you know, engages you because you then don't know if you should trust her either.
Yeah.
And I can't think of any further examples of times that has happened, but
that's an excellent point because I didn't factor that into what I was thinking about trust. Of course, it's trust between her and the father as well.
Yes.
Which kind of gets glided over with kind of broad brush accusations in Occam's razor, but in this it gets a bit more time and content and depth.
Well, yeah. I mean, a lack of trust is what makes good drama. It makes you question characters' motivations. Fidelity is a great example of that as well. Like the fact that you don't know which one of the patients has had the affair, and it sort of comes down to the wire that it's, you know, that lie is about, you know, is going to actually decide the fate of someone's life. That in turn, you know, that is what makes that drama engaging.
Yeah.
So like there's I actually, you know, I have thought of an example like the pilot episode in Paternity are a good example as well. Like when we talked about that in an earlier like the first episode of the podcast, we looked at how it like hits similar like, you know, plot points and certain concepts, but it's just the small tweaks that make it different. It's the sort of, it's the way that information is presented. It's the way that, characters don't just openly speak about their motivations. They, they're alluded to.
Mm.
It's incredible what small changes will make to an episode's quality.
Yeah. And I think this brings us straight into the final part of the episode, which is the confrontation between House and Wilson.
Yes.
Where if you kind of concentrate on the dialogue, a lot is revealed. A significant amount of content is revealed very subtly.
Mm.
Because what you find is House admits he has an addiction, but he doesn't have a problem. He functions. He can pay his bills. He is a functional member of society. And Wilson says, well, is that all you want? You have no relationships. You have very little friends. The hospital is basically everything that you have, apart from your house, himself, Cuddy, and the fellows. And kind of House dismisses that, kind of doubles down on the idea that his vocation is everything that he needs.
Yeah, I think he just says, I function.
Yeah. Which is scary.
Yeah.
And then, basically, I think Wilson confronts him even more, because he's concerned for House.
Yeah.
And House just says, they take away his pain. Now, you could just take it on face value that he's talking about the leg pain, but obviously he's talking about more than that.
Yes, because we definitely know you and I know what the backstory is, but at this point we don't know precisely. But there's a backstory for, not just, his leg hurts now, but there's all the things he's lost because of that leg. We even saw in paternity, like he was clearly interested in sports at one point, and you factor in that he's then lost his access to that.
Mm.
We know that there's been like a bad relationship in the past that House has had.
Yeah.
There's been allusions to that. So it's all these, and we don't yet know how much the leg event factors in, but yeah, it's interesting you say that. It is very much a double entendre in that, what is the pain referring to? It just seems to be an existential pain.
Is it an existential pain? Is it the actual pain? And then we get hints at the beginning of the episode that he's gone from 40 milligrams to 80 milligrams of Vicodin.
Yeah.
But then Wilson talks about how House has actually changed.
Yes.
He's changed, and House dismisses it. Yeah, I'm older. My hair's thinner. Things change.
Yeah, sometimes I get lonely.
Sometimes I get lonely, and like, oh, well, okay. And obviously trying to dismiss the deeper meaning of what Wilson was saying. It's like, you've really changed as a human being. And then it makes you wonder, what was he like before then? What are we missing out on? What are we going to find out?
Yeah. And there's a very interesting point where then after that confrontation, House loses his temper, which he doesn't really do, which I do appreciate because I hate when drama and TV shows is just people shouting. So because House loses his temper and shouts so rarely, because he's so good at brushing things off, that moment where he slams his cane on the table and says, of course I've changed. And then it's just this moment of silence, but it really stands out that clearly Wilson is prodding into something. And as you pointed out before, like House is always diverting the attention from his real life, and it's like as someone breaks through that seal, it's just this rage is released. Like that somebody's caught him out with his pants down.
Yeah. Or pushed him into a corner where he has to lash out to get out. And the thing is, we see it, the penultimate scene shot of that is the conversation between Cuddy and Wilson, where they're discussing that this has been set up by Wilson all along. And it seems like they're trying to get to something. Like they got him to admit he has an addiction issue, but that he doesn't see it as significant.
Yeah. But even Wilson, even after that, like as you say, when Cuddy and Wilson are talking about it, Cuddy's more concerned. Wilson says, maybe he's right.
Yeah.
Which is quite depressing that Wilson like kind of even accepts that, because Because as you say, like the difference between like the type of pain that's being talked about, there seems to be a difference between like the physical pain and just this existential pain
Mm.
of like your kind of outlook on the world. Like House just seems to be very pessimistic a lot of the time. And just him, like, just like there are certain things that maybe he can't fix. Like, even if you like, you know, he takes some drugs and he takes the pain away from his legs, like, he's still lonely, he's still older, he's still got all of those bad memories. Like, in a way, it's like Wilson kind of accepting that there just aren't any fixes to those things and that House won't change. So he's like, maybe we should just keep him drugged up so he can just get through the day and doesn't really have to think about these other things. It's just a very practical kind of sad reality to it that you just sometimes can't be happy. And I think that's a very,
Yeah.
I mean, the subject is explored more, but it's very mature and it's definitely something that people face in their lives. And it's quite annoying in a lot of fiction where, you know, characters will just do something and then they're just happy and everything's fixed. You know, sometimes it's just not possible to be happy in your life fundamentally a lot of the time. And that's kind of what this scratches the surface on.
Yeah. And also the fact that maybe Wilson thinks, you know, this, if House changes again by confronting his issues, will he change back to what he was before into something else? You know, and would that mean the end of that relationship between him, Wilson, and House? Who knows? I mean, that's reading a little bit too, reading too much into it. But I think it's really interesting. Now we're now getting into the psyche of House, not just this kind of surface level that we've had before, where we've seen hints of, you know, egotism and neuroses, and well, not neuroses, but kind of arrogance and egotism and being a show off and a know-it-all, that narcissism, which is always on show when he does something dramatic.
Yeah.
We're now seeing something a little deeper and more terrifying.
Yeah.
That he's more, that, you know, usually, you know, it's easy for writers to kind of just compartmentalize characters into bits. You know, the classic example is Mr. Jekyll. You know, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Yeah.
They're okay, yeah, it's got a doctor in it. Okay, but it's better, like, using that transformation as a means to explore two sides of one person. That we're finding out that that House is just one person composed of all this messed uppiness that writers are willing to kind of examine.
Well, yeah, and I mean that's what real people are like, and that's why. Yeah, it just makes House. I think this House just instantly makes him a more interesting character.
Yeah,
like he was already interesting before, but like that element is just, and they really then start running with it from here.
Yeah, and that's why I think it's the kind of, in a way, it's the real opener of the entire TV show.
Completely,
I think.
Yeah, I would agree.
Mm.
Well, I feel like, you know, Detox has been differentially diagnosed.
Yeah, albeit rambly from me, but yes, we have differentially diagnosed Detox.
Yes, and I think we don't really need a summary in this case, just because we seem to both agree that this is an important moment where the series begins.
Yes.
Not physically, but in what makes it unique. And I think what makes people definitely what makes me like the series, but what makes people probably so passionate about the series, even, you know, 15 years on, people are still connect with this series, and especially the main character.
I think I'd use an analogy to a Runway. The first half of this season has been, to give like a general summary of the first half, has been the runway for the entire TV show. It's just been building up, and the momentum's been building up. And this episode here is where the plane takes off. Momentum has been building, speed has been building, the characters have been established.
Foreman very well.
And then now we're in a sense in takeoff. We're now getting into the kind of the bigger themes of the TV series, because I thought the earliest parts of the season were kind of like there were deconstructions of the procedural drama, where it was just kind of using these characters to kind of slowly break down the tropes and make us think about this series take this series more seriously than just a procedural, by breaking down those elements and subverting expectation and exploring things in a more abstract way, and also engaging with ethical themes more seriously than, a standard medical procedural would, where it will deal with the surface tension between characters, but it won't explore the actual moral dilemmas like in is it Fidelity? Yeah, or Infidelity.
Yeah, true. And there's always, like, especially with those kind of characters, there's always like there's a fix, and it's if a character does something, they might get better.
Yeah,
but it's like not
always
when you're when you're fundamentally unhappy in your life, what would make that better?
Yeah.
Do you want to go out for more dinners? do you want to learn an instrument? What fixes sadness and depression? And it's something which comes out here. And as you say, it's a more sort of forceful, straight on look. No blinking. This is terrible. What do you think about it? What can we actually do?
The healer who can't heal himself.
Yeah, perfectly put.
But yeah, so this is the moment where things start to be constructed. So before it's deconstruction, breaking things down into their elemental parts. Well, the genre into its elemental parts, and now it's starting to create something different. And I think it's no coincidence why the scenario in Occam's Razor is repeated here. On this episode, because it's kind of showing, well, this is a reconstruction of what we did before, which is in itself a trope of the medical procedural drama. And we're also going to look at the same time at House as a character, not just as a prop that kind of gets rolled in to solve the problem. This man has problems and they seem irresolvable. The healer cannot heal himself.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it goes from the initial incident, which is Occam's Razor, where it's this is a procedural drama with a lot of great characters and joy, and then this is recreating it and saying this is House M.D. This is a show in and of itself.
Yeah.
Yeah, perfectly put, I guess.
Yeah. So I think that's my kind of first half of the season summary. And also where I think this episode slots in relation to that.
I completely agree. I think even though we slightly disagree on certain character motivations and what they're thinking, I think we both identify that this is an integral moment in House M.D. that makes it something special.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been great talking to you about this. It's
great disagreeing with you.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, fantastic episode, and midway through the first series, which is great to watch the series again and great to discuss it, because I'm glad that we have managed to make it this long, and hopefully we'll at least get through the first season talking about the establishment of House.
You're already putting a provisional shelf life on this podcast.
Oh no, I'm not. No, we'll get to season 8.
Oh yeah,
we'll smash it. All right. Well, yes. Well, I we both hope that you've enjoyed listening to this podcast. As before, you can leave us a review where you can. You can drop us a message. We've got a Twitter at House M.D Cast, and we've got a Facebook page. We just publish the episodes there. We don't really do a lot there, but if you want to like get in touch with us, then let us know your thoughts, and of course we'll be happy to message you back. And but yeah, overall, like, thanks for listening to the episode. Thanks for listening to the episode for this series this long, if you stuck with us, and hope to see you next week, where we will be discussing a much less complex episode, but hopefully the conversation will be just as interesting. But this is the problem with hitting a peak like an episode like this. Next week can only be disappointing, so join us then.